And we are back to my once every 2 month Insomnia breakdown video with the lyrics to the song Immobilized, the fourth song on the album. In the story so far, we've left off with our protagonist sinking to the bottom of the ocean in nightmare and then drowning in his sleep during Breathe. Immobilized is where we transition to the second half of the album, and the setting starts to move out of the dream sequence and into reality. This song is about sleep paralysis, which is a condition where the body enters a state of paralysis while the mind is still conscious. It can be a quite frightening experience, especially the first time it happens. So paralysis is a natural thing that happens to the body when you fall into a deep sleep. I'm sure it's some sort of evolutionary trait that prevents us from rolling around and falling somewhere that you're not supposed to while you're sleeping. It normally occurs in a later stage of sleep after we lose consciousness, and it's supposed to wear off before we wake up. Sleep paralysis is a defect in this process where either the onset of paralysis occurs before we fall asleep or our mind wakes up while the body's still paralyzed. The reverse effect would be sleepwalking, where the paralysis never occurs and thus any stimuli that's experienced by the brain in our dreams are translated into actual motor functions. The sudden onset of paralysis is what makes this experience so terrifying. You never know how long it's going to last, and it can come with auditory and even visual hallucinations. For me, I get both. My ear muscles sort of clench and it sounds like whispers in my ears. I also tend to see flashes of red, like if I closed my eyes and shone a flashlight through it or something like that. Also, there's a 50-50 chance whether I can breathe or not. That sort of ties in with everything that you see across this album. These are very consistent themes because I do draw them from reality. And the goal of the song is to essentially put into words how I experience sleep paralysis and incorporate it into the story of insomnia. As for the lyrics, we have, "As I'm possessed by sleep, a sense of dread precedes." Being used to the experience of sleep paralysis, I can sort of tell if I'm falling into it. There's sort of a bit of a premonition that occurs now. I probably get about, once every month or so it's not really frightening at this point, it's just kind of annoying. The line that follows that is, "I try to scream, but I can't breathe." And that just connects the ideas between nightmare, drifting, breathe, and immobilized. "Cold sweat rolls down my face, limbs frozen, trapped in place, bound by fear, I can't escape." So physically describing the paralysis. "Whispers by my bedside, as shadows rise along the walls, restrained I lie to watch enthralled." And that talks about the audio and visual hallucinations. The final line of the verse, "With no one here to save me from my own mental slavery, the self-dysfunction, a disruption of my sanity." So we're stressing here that this is an internal disorder, a fault of our own being, which much of this album is about trying to escape. After this first verse happens, we get to the secondary part, which is my favorite part of the song. So we get immobilized, the conscious mind, mesmerized by evil eyes. So sort of cryptically describing sleep paralysis as some sort of curse. Now here's where it gets good. Paralyzed, the body lies. And there's a bit of a double meaning here. Technically the proper way to say this is the body lays, since it's the one doing the action. But the use of the word lie sort of implies that, again, this is a self dysfunction, an internal disorder. The body is lying to itself. And that's followed by petrified, which we use to signify that someone's scared stiff, but it's also the term for something that's preserved in a semi-living state, like the mosquito in Jurassic Park, right? This brief section here is exactly how I would describe the experience of sleep paralysis. Now we get to the second verse, which is more story driving. "But then the ghastly figure crawls from within the mirror, his presence fills the air with fear." So we get a lot of the album's motifs kind of recycled and brought back. The room with the mirror, this ghastly figure. We have this character that normally exists in the dream world, finally entering into reality through this hallucination. "The shades aghast in terror, they cower from his glare, he waves a hand and casts them back to their realm." However, this time, rather than haunting the main character, the ghost instead reaches out to save him. Approaching towards me slowly, he reaches forward and he beckons me to join him. Once again, that's a recall, of course, the opening line of Drifting. "I've come to realize this gesture coincides with the desire to save me from this life, and in this case, to save me from this life is sort of meant quite literally, being saved from life. Now, throughout the album so far, the character constantly runs away from this ghost of his reflection. It's interpreted as a symbol of despair, opposite of the sun acting as a symbol of hope. But here we realize the whole time the ghost is actually trying to save him. This actually hints back to the chorus of Nightmare, "Save me, wake me from this nightmare, save me, set me free," where all three voices, himself, the ghost, and the sun, are all delivering this line with the same intention, although the manner might be different. After this, we have the short bass solo, and then the final verse is sung over the secondary riff. The meter actually changes from one that was strict on the beat, "As I'm possessed by sleep," to one that's more free. "Released from the curse, self-control returned, I raise myself and set my gaze upon the earth." Set my gaze upon the world. Again, that's another recall to the opening of Drifting. "The mark of dawn arrives, the eastern star arises, a signal of the start to yet another day." The mark of dawn here, this is another sunrise analogy. This is actually in contrast to my favorite line of the album, which is the sunset analogy from Nightmare. "But as I feel the rays, the light inflicts the pain, a realization conflicted once again. I have just one desire, freedom from desire, no longer trapped in Somnia." With that, we have the title of the album, Insomnia, in 2 words. No longer trapped in this dream cycle. Of course, this line also carries over to the last song, which is the single word, Insomnia. That video is probably going to come out half a year from now, so let's hold off on talking about that. So that's Immobilized. In the brief video, I talked about how there's a turning point between the first 2 songs and the last 2 songs. This is essentially where that happens. In Drifting and Nightmare, it was all about running from the ghosts, symbol of death and despair, while chasing the sun, the symbol of life and hope, thus continuing this constant cycle of misery. But through the end of Nightmare, we get a deviation from the norm, as he stands at the edge of the ocean, watching the sun go down. Rather than starting over with the beginning of Drifting, where he resists the call and he gets dragged in forcefully, he instead decides to take matters into his own hands and jump into the ocean. And that's sort of continued through the song and reinforced. The sun promotes life and extension of the misery that the character is living through. The sun becomes the villain here, as he wakes up and realizes that the rays are inflicting both physical pain and also a mental torment, that he has to go through another day of the same cycle. With a twist in Immobilized, with a ghost coming to save him, it now becomes a symbol of hope and freedom, a chance to be released from the curse, which is actually his life in this case. So you can see there's a lot of continuity between all of these songs. They're very much connected, not just lyrically, but also musically, and this all comes together at the very end with Insomnia.